mall was alive. It breathed through its dimly lit corridors, exhaled through the flickering fluorescent lights, and whispered through the distant hum of electricity. I stood at the entrance, clutching the keys that marked the start of my first shift as the new night security guard. The vast emptiness before me felt like a cavern, swallowing sound and light. Mr. Hensley, the daytime manager, had handed me a handwritten list before leaving. The paper felt old, almost brittle, and the ink smudged as if the rules had been rewritten countless times. "Follow these," he said, his voice betraying a hint of unease. "Exactly." I glanced over the paper, the instructions awkwardly written in messy, almost frantic handwriting. "Do not let anyone inside after 10 p.m., no matter what. If you hear knocking from the maintenance room, ignore it. Do not answer the phone if it rings after 3 a.m. If you see a mannequin in the hallway, turn around and leave immediately. Always complete your rounds on time. Do not linger." I raised an eyebrow, trying to brush off the odd rules. "This is some kind of joke, right?" I asked, forcing a laugh. Mr. Hensley didn't smile. "Just follow the rules. You'll be fine." The keys jingled in my hand as the heavy glass doors closed behind him. I was alone now, locked in with the eerie silence and the list of bizarre instructions. The first hour passed uneventfully. The mall's cavernous interior was a labyrinth of deserted stores and empty hallways, their polished floors reflecting the pale glow of the overhead lights. The sound of my footsteps echoed too loudly in the empty space, making it feel even more deserted than it already was. But as the clock struck 11 p.m., I heard it. The first knock. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible. A soft rapping against the wall somewhere in the distance, somewhere near the maintenance room. My heart skipped a beat as I froze in place, staring down the corridor. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel a cold sweat starting to form on my palms. The knock came again. 3 deliberate knocks. I glanced at the list, my fingers trembling as I pulled it from my pocket. Rule 2. Ignore the knocking. I forced myself to turn away, trying not to let the panic rise. The sound followed me, though, faintly echoing down the halls. It wasn't until I reached the food court that the knocking stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to suffocate the air. Just as I was about to exhale, relief rushing through me, I turned a corner. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on something that made my blood run cold. A mannequin stood in the center of the hallway. Its blank, expressionless face was tilted slightly, almost as if it were looking directly at me. The stiff, unnatural posture of the figure made my heart race, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. I backed away, quickly remembering Rule 4. Turn around and leave immediately. My feet moved before my mind could catch up, stumbling as I retreated. The mannequin's still form seemed to fade into the shadows behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, that it was waiting for me to leave so it could move again. By 2 a.m., exhaustion and paranoia weighed heavily on me. I stumbled into the security office, hoping to catch a moment's reprieve from the creeping fear. I sat down in front of the monitor, hoping the familiar images of empty mall corridors would offer some comfort. But instead, my gaze was drawn to a single feed. A figure was leaning against the wall near the maintenance room. I squinted at the screen, trying to make out any details. The resolution was grainy, but there was something off about the figure. It was too still, too relaxed. It was almost as if the person had been standing there forever. It took a moment for me to realize that the figure was looking at the camera, or at least it's what it felt like. It turned its head slowly, and in that instant, I swore it was staring directly at me. I grabbed the walkie-talkie, my hand shaking. "Hey, you there? Who are you?" There was no response. The figure didn't move. Minutes passed, the tension thick in the air. I felt like I couldn't breathe, as though the weight of the silence was pressing in on me from all sides. I had to confront it. Whoever or whatever was in the mall, I needed to know. I couldn't let this go on. I stood up, my flashlight casting a shaky beam down the dark hallway. The footsteps I heard echoed too loudly in the hollow emptiness of the space. The maintenance room was just down the hall, but when I reached it, the janitor was gone. The only thing left was the faint scent of something metallic, something that didn't belong. A low, hollow laugh reverberated through the air, and I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. My flashlight flickered, casting the shadows of the empty hallway in strange, warped angles. There was nothing there, just the silence. I didn't sleep that day. I handed Mr. Hensley the keys and resigned on the spot. Whatever haunted that mall, I wanted no part of it. I didn't want to be there any longer than I had to. But as I left, I noticed something on the list of rules. A new line, written in the same smudged ink. You can leave, but it will never leave you. I thought leaving would bring relief. I thought walking out of the mall, locking the doors behind me, would somehow wash away the dread that had settled deep into my bones. But as the night air wrapped around me, cold and sharp, I felt no peace. The streets outside were eerily quiet, empty of the usual hum of city life. It was as if the world itself had decided to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. I didn't go home right away. I found myself pacing the streets, unsure of where to go, too restless to just settle. The air felt thicker than it should, oppressive, like it was pushing me down with every step I took. My mind replayed every detail, every moment I had spent in that cursed mall. The knocking, the mannequin, the figure in the security feed. They haunted me, following me like shadows, lingering just out of reach. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. It was just past 4 a.m. My shift was over. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't done, something unfinished, gnawing at the back of my mind. I found myself standing in front of the mall again. I had no idea why I was back here. I hadn't meant to return, not after what happened. But the familiar outline of the building loomed in front of me, its glass doors still reflecting the dim light of the street lamps. There was something magnetic about it, something I couldn't explain. The doors were locked. The security system was intact. I couldn't get in unless I had the keys that I had handed over to Mr. Hensley. But that didn't matter. I had a compulsion, a pull I couldn't ignore. The dark, lifeless windows stared back at me, empty and cold. For a moment, I thought I saw something move inside. A flicker of light, a shadow shifting. It was so fast, just a quick blur across the window. My pulse quickened. I knew I shouldn't go in, but the curiosity, the need to understand what was happening here, overpowered every shred of common sense I had left. I reached for my phone again, my fingers shaking as I dialed Mr. Hensley's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. Mr. Hensley, I said, trying to steady my voice. It's me, the new guy. Listen, I think I saw something. I need to know what's going on in there. You have to tell me. I ended the call before I could leave a message. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling more and more like I was losing control. What was wrong with me? Why was I doing this? But before I could think any longer, a faint sound caught my attention. A low, muffled thud, followed by the distant hum of the mall's air conditioning system turning on. The sound was coming from inside. I instinctively looked at the glass doors again, as though the sound itself had somehow driven me to do it. And that's when I saw it. The faintest outline of a figure standing just behind one of the windows, hidden in the shadows. It was impossible to make out any details, but the figure was there, still watching, waiting. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run far away from this place. But my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. My hand gripped the cold, metal door handle, but I didn't dare open it. Not yet. There was something about the stillness inside that unnerved me even more than the figure I had seen. The silence felt unnatural, like the mall itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I turned away and walked down the street, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me like a second skin. My feet moved faster as I distanced myself from the mall, but no matter how far I walked, I couldn't escape the sense that something was following me, just out of sight. It was around 5 a.m. when I finally found myself standing in front of a 24-hour diner. My stomach was in knots, but I hadn't eaten since the night before. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, greeted by the comforting warmth of the diner's neon lights. The clink of silverware and the hum of conversation filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence of the mall. I slid into a booth by the window, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. The waitress came over, an older woman with a tired smile, and took my order without asking any questions. I tried to calm my mind to focus on something other than the mall. The diner felt like a safe place, a normal place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the world outside had shifted, that something was different now. Something was watching. The waitress brought my coffee, and I sipped it absently, staring out the window. The world outside was still quiet, the streets empty and desolate. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in the back of my mind, the sense that I had crossed some sort of line, that I had stepped into a world that wasn't my own. A sudden noise broke my thoughts, a loud crash followed by the sound of scraping metal. I snapped my head toward the window, my heart leaping in my chest. A figure was walking down the street. I squinted through the glass, my breath fogging the window. The figure was tall and unnaturally still, their movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. It was hard to make out any details through the fog, but the shape was unmistakable. It was the same figure I had seen inside the mall. I didn't know how I knew it, but I did. I could feel it in my bones. The figure stopped just outside the diner, standing perfectly still. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it, my heart racing. And then, as if sensing my gaze, the figure turned. Slowly, deliberately. It looked directly at me. The moment our eyes met, I felt something cold and unyielding sink into my chest. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, something that gnawed at the very core of my being. I knew then that whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. It wasn't anything that belonged in this world. I stood up abruptly, my hands trembling as I reached for my wallet, tossing money onto the table. The waitress looked up in surprise, but I didn't stay long enough to explain. I rushed out of the diner and into the street, the figure's gaze still burning into me, following my every step. I didn't look back until I reached my car. The figure was gone, but the unease didn't leave. The feeling that I was being watched, hunted, stayed with me as I drove away from the diner, from the mall, from everything that had led me here. I didn't know where to go, what to do. The only thing I knew was that the mall wasn't done with me, and I was beginning to fear that it never would be. The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and unease. I tried to go back to my normal routine, work, sleep, the occasional trip to the gym, but it was hard to focus. My mind kept drifting back to the mall, to that figure I had seen standing outside the diner, to the cold, unsettling gaze that followed me even as I drove away. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that it had only just begun. I spent hours pacing in my small apartment, the walls closing in on me with every passing minute. The more I tried to push the thoughts away, the stronger they became. What was it? What did I see in that window? I had convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The stress of my first shift, the late-night hours, the isolation. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I could feel it. The next night, I made a decision. I couldn't just let this thing fester in my mind, eating away at me. I needed answers, even if those answers led me back into that cursed mall. I gathered my things, nothing extravagant, just a flashlight, my phone, and a bottle of water, and drove back to the mall. The city felt empty, as if everyone else had gone to bed, leaving only the echoes of my footsteps to fill the air. The drive was long, and by the time I reached the mall, the sun was already sinking beneath the horizon. The mall loomed in front of me, its glass doors reflecting the fading light. I parked in the empty lot, the silence almost deafening in its stillness. As I walked toward the entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few steps. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried the doors. Locked. Of course. I fished around in my pocket for the keys I had kept. The ones I had taken that night, the ones Mr. Hensley had forgotten to take back. The keys felt heavier now, as if they carried a weight far beyond their purpose. I slid the key into the lock, turning it with a quiet click. The door opened with a soft groan, and I stepped inside. The mall was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your heart race. The lights were dim, casting long shadows along the empty hallways. I hesitated at the threshold, my breath shallow and uneven. But I had come this far. I couldn't turn back now. I started walking. My footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, a reminder that I was alone in this place. Alone, or was I? A chill ran down my spine as I passed the maintenance room, the door slightly ajar. The knocking from that first night flashed in my mind, and I involuntarily shuddered. I remember the rules. Ignore the knocking. I forced my gaze forward and kept walking, ignoring the way the door seemed to beckon me. The hallways stretched on, empty storefronts with their shutters half closed. There was something unsettling about the way the mall had been left, as though it had been abandoned. Yet it wasn't. It was stuck in time. The place was alive, but only in the way that something long forgotten stirs to life after being disturbed. I turned a corner and froze. There, at the end of the hallway, was a mannequin. It stood perfectly still, facing me. I could feel its empty eyes on me, even though I knew it couldn't possibly see me. It was just a mannequin, but there was something wrong with it, something unsettling about its unnatural stillness. I swallowed hard. Rule number 4 echoed in my mind. Turn around and leave immediately. But I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of stone, my body frozen in place as I stared at the mannequin. It was just a mannequin, right? The figure's face seemed to shift, its head tilting ever so slightly. It looked like it was alive, like it had just been waiting for me to look at it. I forced myself to blink, hoping that it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. When I opened my eyes again, the mannequin was gone. Gone. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, but there was nothing. No mannequin, just an empty hallway. My pulse thundered in my ears as I scrambled backward, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? Where did it go? I turned to leave, my hands trembling as I gripped the flashlight. I had to get out of here. I had to leave before I saw something worse. But then I heard it, a soft laugh. Low, hollow. It echoed through the hallways, reverberating off the walls like a whisper in the dark. I froze again. No, I thought. Not again. The laughter grew louder, more distinct, and with it a new sound, footsteps. Slow, methodical, coming toward me. I backed up, my breath coming in short gasps. I had to leave. I had to get away from whatever was coming for me. But my legs wouldn't move. They were rooted to the ground, as if the very air had turned to concrete. Then the footsteps stopped. I blinked, looking around, my eyes wide with fear. Where did it go? The hallway was empty again. No mannequin, no footsteps, no laughter. But something wasn't right. Something had changed. I could feel it in the air. The atmosphere felt thicker now, suffocating, as though I was surrounded by an invisible presence. I wasn't alone. I had to get to the security office. That was the only place I could feel safe. I turned and ran, my breath ragged as I sprinted down the hallway, the sound of my own footsteps now drowned out by the pounding of my heart. I reached the security office and fumbled with the keys to unlock the door. My hands were slick with sweat, my pulse racing. Finally, the door clicked open and I stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath, my mind reeling. What was happening? What was in that mall? What was following me? I grabbed the walkie-talkie, my hands shaking as I pressed the button. Mr. Hensley, I said, my voice hoarse. It's happening again. I saw the mannequin. It moved. It wasn't supposed to move. I paused, my eyes darting to the monitors on the wall. Something's wrong with this place. I waited for a response, but the walkie-talkie crackled, offering nothing but static. Mr. Hensley? I called again, but there was only silence. The air in the security office felt suffocating now, heavier than before. I looked around the room, my gaze locking on the monitors. The mall was still empty, except for one thing. a figure standing in the distance, in the middle of the food court. It was the same figure I had seen earlier. But this time, it wasn't just standing still. It was moving. I wasn't alone anymore. The air in the security office had grown impossibly thick. Each breath felt like I was inhaling pure dread, and my heart pounded in my chest like a drumbeat. The figure in the food court, was it real? Or was it another trick of my overactive mind? I stared at the monitor, unable to look away. The figure was still there, standing motionless. But unlike before, it wasn't simply a vague shadow. It had a form, distinct and unnerving. A tall, lean silhouette dressed in what looked like a janitor's uniform. His face was obscured, but his posture was too relaxed for comfort, as if he were waiting for something. Or someone. I swallowed hard, my hands clammy as I gripped the walkie-talkie again. "Mr. Hensley?" I called, my voice trembling despite myself. "I need help. There's someone in the food court." But there was no response. The static crackled in my ear, mocking me with its emptiness. Why wasn't anyone answering? I glanced at the other monitors. The mall's corridors were eerily still, no sign of movement. I turned my attention back to the figure in the food court. He hadn't moved a single inch. I couldn't just sit here. I had to confront this, to find out what was really going on. The terror that had gripped me earlier had started to transform into something else. An unsettling curiosity, a need to understand the impossible. I grabbed the flashlight and pushed open the door to the security office, stepping out into the cold, sterile hallway. The mall stretched out before me, its emptiness amplifying every sound. My footsteps echoed with a haunting clarity, each one louder than the last. I held my breath as I approached the food court. The silence was unbearable, as though time itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. My flashlight flickered in the dim light, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. I reached the entrance to the food court and peered around the corner. The figure was still there, but now something was different. He was no longer standing still. He was walking toward me, slowly, deliberately, as if every step were measured. His movements were unnaturally smooth, like he wasn't quite human. My heart rate spiked, and my fingers tightened around the flashlight. The janitor's figure grew clearer as he approached, his face still hidden by the shadows. I didn't know what to do. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to obey. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to look away. He took another step, and then, as if sensing my fear, he stopped, dead in his tracks. The hallway felt like it was collapsing around me. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thick and heavy. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed ominously, casting strange flickers that made the shadows dance like specters. But what truly terrified me wasn't the figure in front of me. No, it was the sudden realization that something was wrong, deeply wrong, with the entire mall. The janitor's figure wasn't the only one there. I slowly turned my head, my flashlight beam sweeping across the food court. And that's when I saw them. At first, I thought they were mannequins. They stood along the walls, some partially hidden by shadows, others barely visible behind the overturned tables. But then, as the light moved over them, I saw it. They weren't mannequins at all. They were people, or at least they used to be, frozen in unnatural, grotesque poses. Their eyes were wide open, staring blankly ahead. Their bodies were stiff, as though they had been petrified in the middle of whatever they had been doing. A woman, mid-sentence, her mouth agape as if screaming for help. A man, his hands outstretched, his fingers curled in a twisted grip. A child, clutching a half-eaten ice cream cone, eyes wide with terror. I stepped backward, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This was not normal. This was not just a mall. This was something else. A nightmare made real. The janitor moved again, his head tilting slightly, as though studying me. And then, in a voice that was not his own, a voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves, I heard it. "Do you think you can escape?" The words sent a shock of ice through my veins. The janitor's lips didn't move, but somehow, I felt the words as if they had been spoken directly into my mind. I staggered back, my feet stumbling over the cold tile floor. My flashlight dropped from my hand, clattering loudly against the ground, but I didn't stop to pick it up. I turned and ran, my pulse hammering in my chest, the sound of my own footsteps chasing me down the dark hallways. The mall had become a maze, a labyrinth of corridors and dead ends, all leading me deeper into its heart. No matter which way I turned, I found myself circling back to the same place. The food court, the mannequins, the figures standing perfectly still, their eyes unblinking. It was like the mall had changed. It was no longer a building of stores and shops. It was a living thing, breathing and pulsing, its walls shifting and changing, its corridors warping into endless loops. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance around me, mocking me. I couldn't escape. I couldn't find the exit. I stumbled into a store. A clothing store, its shelves filled with dusty, forgotten garments. The mannequins in the windows seemed to leer at me, their hollow eyes following my every move. Then I heard it again. A knock, faint but growing louder. The maintenance room. I knew the rules. I knew what Mr. Hensley had said, but I also knew that if I wanted to escape this nightmare, I had to find the source. I had to know what was happening here. Ignoring the growing sense of dread that crawled up my spine, I made my way toward the maintenance room. The knocking became more distinct, more insistent, as though someone or something was waiting for me. I reached the door, my hand trembling as I grabbed the handle. But before I could turn it, the door swung open on its own, and standing there, in the darkness, was a figure. A tall, imposing figure dressed in black. Its face was hidden, but I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing down on me. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice hissed, a voice that wasn't human, that was too deep, too cold. I froze. The lights overhead flickered one last time, and then everything went dark. The darkness swallowed me whole. I blinked, but no light came. No sound either, except the relentless pounding of my heart in my ears. I felt the air around me shift, thickening with the smell of rust and decay, like the very walls were closing in. My breath was shallow, each inhale feeling heavier, as though the air itself had become poison. The figure in front of me remained still, silent. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its presence, cold and suffocating, like it was never meant to be seen. It stood in the threshold of the maintenance room, blocking the only way out. My body was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to scream. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice whispered again. It slithered into my mind like a serpent, its tone cold and filled with malice. The words didn't just echo through the air. They reverberated inside my skull, crawling through my thoughts. I tried to take a step back, but my legs wouldn't obey me. It felt like I was paralyzed, as if something invisible held me in place. I wanted to scream, but my throat had gone dry, my voice lost to the oppressive silence that surrounded me. Who was this? What did they want from me? The figure's shape wavered in the darkness, as though it was made of shadows, something that couldn't exist in the real world. Its outline shifted, morphing in and out of focus, but always remaining just beyond the edge of my comprehension. Every time I blinked, it seemed closer. And then, as if it could sense my thoughts, it spoke again, the words more like a thought transmitted directly into my mind than a voice spoken aloud. "You don't understand yet, do you?" I wanted to respond, to ask what it meant, but no words came. I felt as if I had been plunged into some terrible dream, where nothing made sense, and every moment was like sinking deeper into a nightmare. The silence grew unbearable. Then, without warning, the lights flickered back on. For a moment, I was disoriented by the sudden brightness. I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust, and there it was. The figure was still standing in front of me, but now, something was different. I could see it more clearly now, and that only made everything worse. It wasn't just a shadow. It was human, or had once been. The face I had been unable to see in the dark was now exposed, and I regretted every second of it. It was a face that wasn't a face at all. It was smooth, too smooth, like skin stretched too tightly over a skull, without any features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank, featureless surface. The skin itself looked like it was made from a substance that wasn't flesh, more like something synthetic, something wrong. The figure took a step forward, and I felt a strange pull like I was being drawn toward it, despite every instinct screaming at me to run. "You don't belong here," it said again, its voice not from its lips, but from within my mind, like a thought too powerful to ignore. "None of you do." I tried to scream, to break free of the grip it seemed to have on me. But my voice was nothing but a whisper lost in the suffocating silence. The darkness around me seemed to pulse, like the building itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with the figure before me. Why? Why is this happening? And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, everything stopped. The figure was gone. The maintenance room doors slammed shut with a deafening crack, and the air around me lightened, as if the weight that had been pressing down on me was lifted. I stumbled backward, my legs finally able to move, but the room spun around me. My hands gripped the walls for support, my mind racing. Was this real? Had it all been some kind of hallucination? No, it couldn't be. The feeling of that thing was still with me. It lingered, like the echo of a nightmare that wouldn't let go. I turned, desperate to escape, and bolted toward the exit. But as I did, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The hallway was no longer empty. There were more of them. Figures, shapes, standing at the far end, their outlines barely visible in the dim light, but unmistakable. More of those featureless, faceless figures scattered throughout the corridor. Some stood motionless. Others twitched unnervingly, like they were trying to move but couldn't quite manage it. My heart raced. The air felt too thick, too heavy. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I had to get out, had to escape. But the figures were closing in, slowly, deliberately, and there was no way around them. I bolted toward the security office, each footstep echoing off the walls, my pulse thundering in my ears. I had to get to the monitors to see what was happening, to make sense of this madness. But as I reached the door, I hesitated. A whisper drifted to me from the shadows, too faint to understand at first. But as I listened, the words became clear, sharp, and unmistakable. "They know you're here now?" I spun around, heart in my throat. The hallway was empty, too empty. The figures were gone, but the words, the feeling, the dread, they stayed. How could they know? I hadn't even told anyone I was working here. How could they possibly know? My thoughts spun wildly as I reached for the security office door. When I turned the handle, it didn't budge. The door was locked from the inside. Locked from the inside. I slammed my fists against the door, my mind racing, but no answer came. Panic surged in me, threatening to overtake my senses. The figures were back. I could feel them moving in the dark, drawing closer with every breath. I spun around again, frantically searching for another way out, but there was nothing. No exit, no way forward, no way back. Just the endless halls of this cursed place, and the darkness pressing in. "You can't leave," a voice whispered, not from the figure in the hallway, but from somewhere deeper, within the very walls themselves. I froze. The mall doesn't let anyone leave. Not once you've seen it. And then, in the sudden silence that followed, the truth hit me with a sickening force. This wasn't just a mall. It wasn't just an abandoned building. It was a prison, and I was its latest prisoner. The room was too quiet, too still. I pressed my ear against the cold metal door of the security office, listening for any sign of movement in the hall. My breath came in short bursts, ragged from the panic, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to think, to focus. There had to be a way out of this. But as I stood there, my hands still gripping the door handle, I realized with a growing sense of dread that the hallway was too silent. The figures, the faceless ones, had disappeared, but the silence they left behind was far more terrifying. It wasn't a comforting quiet. It was a dead silence, like the mall had stopped breathing entirely, waiting for something or someone to make the next move. Then, the whispering began again. It was faint at first, so soft that I almost dismissed it as the wind rattling through the vents. But it wasn't the wind. The whispers grew louder, clearer, as though they were rising from the very walls around me. The voices seemed to be calling my name, a low hum of syllables repeating over and over. It knew me. It knew who I was. But how? How could it know? I shook my head and stepped back from the door, my mind racing. The thought that there was something beyond the physical walls of the mall, something unseen but deeply connected to its very existence, gripped me with a fear I hadn't known before. It wasn't just haunting the mall. It was the mall. The idea of it, a living, breathing thing that could reach into your mind and twist it, made my skin crawl. I turned away from the door, my pulse quickening. My eyes scanned the room for anything that could help me understand what was happening. The monitors sat before me, dark and quiet as if mocking me. I didn't want to look at them. They were too still, too perfect in their emptiness. But I had no choice. My fingers trembled as I reached for the control panel. With a soft click, the monitors flickered to life. Each camera feed displayed empty halls, lifeless shops, and corridors that stretched out like veins through the mall's labyrinthine heart. It all seemed so normal, but I knew it wasn't. I knew I wasn't alone. I flipped through the feeds, searching for something, anything, that could give me a clue. And then, as I cycled through the cameras, I froze. On one of the screens, deep in the shadows of the farthest corner of the mall, I saw movement. It was small at first, a flicker of something just beyond the reach of the camera's lens. I leaned forward, my eyes straining to see better. The movement continued, slow and deliberate. It wasn't human. It was too jerky, too erratic, but it was there, unmistakably real and getting closer. I felt a cold sweat break out along the back of my neck as I watched the figure approach the camera. It moved with unnatural grace, its shape indistinct, like it wasn't fully solid. It shimmered, like an outline, a shadow trying to take form, but it never fully succeeded. It was a distortion, something wrong. My stomach churned as I stared at it, trying to make sense of the impossible image on the screen. Suddenly, the figure stopped, the camera feed blinked, and for a split second, I thought the screen had gone black. But when the feed returned, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty again. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. I didn't know what I had just seen, but I knew it wasn't something I could ignore. The whispers had stopped, but the tension in the air was unbearable. The walls felt as though they were closing in again, as if the mall itself was tightening its grip on me. A soft click behind me startled me. I spun around, my heart racing, expecting something to leap out from the shadows. But it was only the faint sound of a door opening. I stepped back, unsure of what to do. I hadn't heard anyone come in, and the door was supposed to be locked. I glanced nervously at the monitors again. The maintenance room feed was still blank, but the door had opened. Had I missed something? I approached cautiously, each step echoing in the silence of the room. I reached the door to the hallway, my hand trembling as I touched the handle. It was cool to the touch, like the walls themselves had been frozen. As I pushed the door open, the air felt different. It was heavier, more oppressive, like the space had been waiting for me. And then, I heard it, a low, almost imperceptible hum, as though the building itself was resonating. My gaze shifted upward, and for the first time I noticed something strange. There were faint lines in the walls, thin cracks running like veins across the surface. They were old, perhaps ancient, but they looked like they had been recently disturbed. Like the mall itself was slowly coming apart. I stepped into the hallway, my senses alert. The usual hum of electricity that had filled the mall with an eerie kind of life was gone. It had been replaced by a sound I couldn't place, a low, distant rumble, like something massive moving far below my feet. Then I heard it, the soft scrape of something metal against the floor, coming from the far end of the hall. My blood ran cold. It was too faint to be a person, too deliberate to be a machine. It was something in between, something old, something alive. I turned, but the hallway behind me was still empty, just shadows stretching in the dim light. I had no choice. I had to move forward. As I walked down the corridor, I noticed something else. The walls, the floors, the ceilings, they were all subtly shifting, changing. The mall wasn't just a building anymore. It was something more, something alive, like it was adapting, twisting around me, trying to change its shape. I could hear the sound again, growing louder now, a rhythmic scraping. It was getting closer, My pulse hammered in my ears. What the hell was it? What had I gotten myself into? And then, as I rounded the corner, I saw it. It was a figure, crouched on the floor, dragging something behind it. The figure was like the ones I had seen before, faceless, shapeless, but this one was different. It was dragging a long, rusted pipe, scraping it against the floor in a maddening rhythm. The figure stopped when it saw me. I froze. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them made sense. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. It was the figure from the camera, the one that had shimmered and disappeared. And now it was here, real, standing before me. "You shouldn't have come back," it whispered, its voice seeping into my thoughts, cold and distant. The hallway around me seemed to warp and bend. The walls pulsated, as if the very structure of the mall was alive, breathing with a malevolent purpose. The lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. I didn't understand. None of it made sense. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and it had just begun to show me its true face. I didn't know how much longer I could stand there. The scraping sound was deafening now, and the figure, the faceless, twisted thing, was drawing closer, dragging its rusted pipe behind it. The air was thick with a suffocating metallic stench, as if the very structure of the mall was rotting away from the inside. The walls were pulsing, almost as though they were alive, their cracks widening with each breath I took. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. But no matter how much I tried to move, it felt like I was stuck in place, trapped by the weight of the building itself. The figure's footsteps echoed in my mind, each one amplifying the dread that clawed at my insides. It was getting closer. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was watching me. I could feel its empty, soulless gaze pierce through me. Suddenly it stopped. The scraping ceased. A low, guttural laugh reverberated through the walls, sending a cold shiver down my spine. "You don't understand," it whispered, its voice now deep and distorted. "You think you're the first? You think you're the only one who's heard the whispers? The mall has always been this way. Always has been. You're just the next one to play its game." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My legs nearly gave out as I tried to process what it was saying. The mall had always been this way? The whispers? What game? I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. The fear had taken over, leaving me frozen in place. "This is how it works," the figure continued, its voice now strangely calm, almost sympathetic. "You come, you listen, you obey, and then you become part of it. The mall chooses. It doesn't just haunt you, it feeds on you, on your fear, on your desperation. You're here for a reason." I felt my chest tighten. My breath quickened. I was beginning to understand, but I didn't want to believe it. The whispers, the mannequins, the faceless figures, the eerie rules Mr. Hensley had given me. Everything was connected. This wasn't just some haunted mall. It was a living, breathing entity, feeding on the souls of those who worked there, those who stayed too long, those who couldn't escape. And I had walked right into its trap. "You think you can leave?" The figure stepped closer, its shape flickering in and out of existence like a broken television screen. For a moment, it seemed to dissolve into nothingness, and I thought I was imagining it. But then, it reappeared in front of me, towering over me, its presence suffocating. "You can't leave," it repeated, its voice a low growl now. "You may walk out those doors, but the mall never lets go. It will follow you. Always." I couldn't breathe. The weight of the figure's words settled on me, crushing the air out of my lungs. The truth was clear now. The mall wasn't just a building. It was a prison, and I was trapped. But even as I stood there, paralyzed by fear, a small part of me still resisted. Something inside me rebelled against the idea of becoming another lost soul, another pawn in the mall's twisted game. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, my voice barely audible. "I won't stay. I won't be a part of this." The figure's laugh grew louder, more distorted. It was mocking me now, reveling in my fear. "You already are," it hissed. "It's too late for you. You've already chosen. You think the rules are just random? They're the path to your fate. Each rule you follow, each step you take, pulls you deeper into the mall's grip. It's been waiting for someone like you, someone willing to listen. I staggered backward, my heart racing. I needed to get out. I needed to escape. But as I turned to run, the walls seemed to close in, the hallway narrowing until it was nothing but a dark, suffocating tunnel. I could hear the figure's footsteps behind me, growing closer, its voice echoing in my ears. You can't run. There is no escape. The mall knows you now. You belong to it. But something inside me snapped. I refused to let it win. I wasn't going to be another lost soul, another nameless victim swallowed by the darkness of this place. The walls trembled as I pushed forward, my pulse pounding in my ears. The further I ran, the more distorted the mall became. The once familiar halls twisted, turning into a labyrinth that shifted and changed, mocking my attempts to escape. Then, as I reached the far end of the hall, I saw it. A door. The exit. The real one. With all the strength I had left, I sprinted toward it. The whispers and the footsteps grew louder, but I couldn't stop. I was almost there. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling. I turned it. The door opened, and I stepped outside. For a moment, I stood there, panting, the cool night air hitting my face like a splash of cold water. The mall loomed behind me, silent and still, as if nothing had happened at all. The doors had closed behind me with a soft click. The whispers were gone. The figure was gone. I was free. But as I looked around, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The streets, the buildings, the sky, they were all wrong. The world outside the mall had changed. It wasn't the same. The colors were muted, the streets empty, the air thick with a strange, oppressive quiet. I took a step forward, but it felt wrong. The ground beneath me was too soft, too malleable. I looked down and gasped. The pavement was dissolving into something else. Something like smoke, something that shouldn't exist. I turned around, and the mall was there again, standing tall behind me. It wasn't just behind me. It was everywhere. Its walls stretched across the skyline, its lights flickering in the distance. It had followed me. It had always been here. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. The mall wasn't just a place. It was a part of everything. It was woven into the fabric of reality itself. And now, it had claimed me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The walls of the mall closed in on me once again. The whispers returned, louder this time, and I understood them. Welcome home, they said in unison, 1,000 voices blending together. You'll never leave.